Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to keep this brief because I'm just going to reiterate everything that my fellow comrades just mentioned. I mean, it's of essence to understand that the history of policing in the U.S. has always been in an effort to support those capitalist and racist power structures. So having that said, the early colonies, the policing in the colonies, it took two different forms. There was the watch form, which was informal, and where it was done basically by volunteers. The second one was the big stick, which is a private, for-profit sort of policing. The first night watch was established in Boston in 1636, and the first day watch was established in New York in 1844. After the American Revolution, they began centralizing municipal police departments. The first one was in Boston in 1838, and by 1880s, all the major cities had some sort of police department. In the southern states, this development took a different route, and that's because slave patrol was their system. And the first slave patrol department was established in 1704 in the Carolinas colonies, and they basically served three functions. The first one was to chase down, apprehend, and return to owners those slaves that had escaped. The second one was to provide a form of organizing terror to deter the slave revolts. And the third one was to maintain a form of discipline for slave workers. So after the Civil War, these forces evolved into something, as terrorizing and cruel as the first, but the two purposes were that the first one was a mean of controlling those now free slaves, who were now working in the agricultural caste system. And the second was to enforce those Jim Crow segregation laws. So what brought upon police, the need for a police department, for a police force? It wasn't an increase in crime. There is, to this day, no clear evidence of a crime wave or a crime increase. If anything, mob violence increased, and this was towards those foreign immigrants, those Eastern European, for African Americans that were now free. And they say public disorder. Public disorder is why we need these police departments. As we know, what constitutes social and public order depends on who defines those terms. Having that said, to redefine social control as crime control, you have to set a different class of people. And this is when you bring in the dangerous classes. It proposes that public drunkenness, crime, political protest, and rioting are products of a, and I quote, biologically inferior, unskilled, and uneducated classes. It's ironic because, if anything, the consumption of alcohol has been pushed by these commercial companies that are creating venues encouraging overconsumption, and needless to say, those expendable classes were the poor, the foreign immigrants, and the freed blacks. Post the Civil War era, these police departments turned their attention to strike breaking. In New York City alone, 5,090 strikes involving 1 million people happened just from 1880 to 1900. So now they restructured to serve two purposes. The first, strike-breaking form is the most obvious and the extremely violent of dispersal of these demonstrations. And the second one is more subtle. Nonetheless, it's just trivial public order offenses, to criminalize an entire population. Then we have the state police. The state police emerged for similar reasons. The first one was the Pennsylvania State Police Department, all-white, all-native paramilitary force, which was created to break strikes in the coal fields in Pennsylvania. These enforcers were located in barracks outside the towns and weren't allowed to mingle because they didn't want them to associate or build relationships with these communities that were expendable. So they basically just attacked and terrorized the community, social events on horsebacks, broke up riots. Another example was the Texas Rangers, which were created as a quasi-official group and vigilantes, and they were there to suppress the Mexican communities, the Bracero program, and to drive the Comanche off their land. By the 19th century, the police provided countless services and assistance to day-to-day political affairs, which is what brings in how this capitalist system is running this police force, which is sold to us as a system that protects the people when it was never intended to be that. So if anyone here still thinks that we can reform the system, I mean, the system wasn't working to begin with, you know? And it's enraging because the more you dig and the more you try to educate yourself, the more horrors that you learn about. And I mean, the prison industrial complex, just like the military and the immigration industrial complex, are all the same mechanisms that share those principles of labor exploitation. And they mimic the capitalist pre-Civil War slave plantation economies that they use slavery just to maximize profit. And this is a time where we need to develop a different type of system, social, political, and economic, where we can be self-regulating and self-sufficient. We don't need a police department to brutalize our communities and to kill our youth. Thank you for your time. Fortunately, I didn't seem to find any connection on that, but like I said, is it on?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not an expert in the Mexican struggle, so unfortunately I don't have an answer for that. But in regards to, what was your name, sir? Tyrone, and you mentioned something about Penn State police being kept separate, right? And you made a connection with NYPD. And if we propose that should remain like a status quo, that they don't live within the community, addressing that topic, I would say that it's beyond confrontation. Like, they're not trying to avoid confrontation between the police and the community. I think that we as people have the humanity is inside of us. So when these people aren't allowed to mingle with those that are deemed expendable and not worthy, you know, like that human kindness kicks in, and then they would stop terrorizing people. You know, if they could mingle and build relationships and be part of a community. And that's what I mean when I say that we need to be self-regulating and self-dependable, because as communities, that's what makes us strong, you know, not having separate classes and separatism. Thank you.